Greetings, fellow Whovians. Well, today we're going to be looking at the departure of another companion. That's right, we're going to be looking at the departure of Jo Grant and the story called The Green Death. Well, here we go. The doctors make adjustments to the TARDIS's coordinate programmer in preparation for a visit to Metebelis 3. When Jo reads in the paper about the mysterious death of a miner named Hughes in the abandoned coal mine in Fairfatch in South Wales, the miner, doing a monthly inspection of the bottom of the mine shaft, emerged dead and glowing bright green. Jo takes this opportunity to meet the acclaimed local environmentalist Nobel Prize winner Professor Clifford Jones, while Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart goes down to investigate the miner's death, taking Jo with him in his car. The doctor agrees to follow the Brigadier, but is determined to go to Metebelis 3 first. The Brigadier's first port of call is the recently opened Global Chemicals oil plant, close to the abandoned mine. Its headman, Stevens, claims that the plant can, quote, produce 25% more petrol and diesel fuel from a given quantity of crude oil, but that the Stevens process only produces a minimal amount of waste. Jones, in his environmentally friendly retreat in the Hole Wheel, nicknamed the Nut Hutch by the locals, is convinced that the oil-making process must create thousands of gallons of waste. He also believes that there was a link between Global Chemicals and Hughes' death, but his research is too demanding for him to go down to the mine and investigate. Jo, who is on the environmentalist side, heads for the mine shaft. The doctor reaches Metebelis 3, but it is far from the blue paradise he described. He is attacked by various unseen creatures, returning to the unit laboratory with only a small blue crystal to show for his misadventure. Plot point! He then drives down to South Wales in his car, Bessie, and meets the Brigadier at Global Chemicals. The two then set off to go down the mine to investigate, despite Stevenson's insistence that it should be sealed. Stevens summons his henchman, Hinks, and tells him in a strange, emotionless voice nobody must go down the mine. Hinks leaves, and Stevens dons a pair of strange headphones. Jo has arrived at the pit head ahead of the doctor and the Brigadier, and gone down the shaft with a miner called Bert to help another man, Di Evans, who has called for help at the bottom of the mine. When the doctor and the Brigadier arrive, Dave, the man controlling Cage's descent, finds that the break has been sabotaged. Dun dun dun! The doctor manages to slow the Cage's descent, but his efforts leave Jo and Bert trapped at the bottom of the shaft. There, they find Di Evans, who is turning bright green and dying. Bert remembers there was an emergency shaft out of the mine, and he and Jo set off. The doctor suggests cutting the mine shaft cables linking the two cages together, which would enable him to use the second cage to get down the mine. The Brigadier goes to Global Chemicals to request some cutting equipment, but a man named Fell informs him that they do not have such equipment. I wonder why. The doctor has Professor Jones and his Hole Wheel friends create a demonstration at the Global Chemicals gate, while he slips in an attempt to steal the equipment from where it is stored in a large shed. However, he is captured, and Stevens shows him that the shed is empty. Fortunately, Dave and the Brigadier, while on their way to Newport to find some cutting equipment, have stopped at a petrol station and found a man using the required equipment to cut up an old car. They borrow this, raid the secondary mine cage, and the doctor goes down the shaft with Dave and two other miners. They find Di Evans now dead, and a note from Jo telling them that she and Bert have headed for the emergency shaft. Jo and Bert have made good progress through the old mine tunnels, when they find a green slime trickling down the wall. When Bert touches this, he begins to grow weak, and his hand starts to turn bright green. At Bert's insistence, Jo goes on without him. Dave and the doctor find Bert, and the doctor goes on to find Jo. By the time they reunite, Jo has found a vast lake of bright green slime, filled with huge maggot creatures. When the tunnel collapses behind them, they use an old mining wagon to get across the green lake. They then climb a steep shaft, where the doctor collects a huge egg to take back for experimentation. At the top of the natural shaft, they find a large pipe, with the insides covered with traces of crude oil waste, meaning that the pipe leads to the Global Chemicals plant. In the plant, a worker named Elgin, an old friend of Fell, tells him about Di Evanson's death and the dying Bert. Elgin later follows Fell into a public control room, where Fell is probably the oil waste for the main tank on level 4 into another tank. The security system then registers the Doctor and Joe's presence in the pipe. Fell was actually arranged for the waste to be pumped down the pipe into the abandoned mine workings. It's initially reluctant to rescue the two in the pipe. Elgin convinces Fell to help him open the hatch, and the Doctor and Joe escape as the oil waste cascades down the pipe. Fell goes to see Stevens, complaining about a headache, and Stevens puts the strange headphones on Fell. A voice tells Stevens that Fell's processing was a failure and orders self-destruction. After Stevens presses a button on a small control panel, Fell leaves the room and jumps off a balcony to his death. Ugh. The Doctor, Joe, and the Brigadier end the day with a meal of fungus at the nut hutch, but the frivolity is cut short when they hear Bert, too, has died. After everyone retires to bed, the egg the Doctor brought back from the mine hatches out into a giant maggot. Escaping from the lab where the egg was left, the maggot first heads for Joe, but then jumps on and bites Hinks, sent to the nut hutch by Stevens to steal the egg. The maggot escapes from the house into the dark, and Hinks quickly weakens as the poisonous green death infection spreads through his body. The next morning, the Brigadier has the unit troops lay explosives and detonate the whole mine pithead, to the Doctor's fury. This fails to trap the maggots in the mine as they begin to emerge. First, attempting to escape up the Global Chemicals waste disposal pipe, then burrowing through the slag heap near the mine. At Global Chemicals, Mike Gates has been sent in undercover by the Brigadier and is contacted by the Doctor, who dons some improbable disguises to get through the gates and move freely. Having liaised with Yates, the Doctor learns that Stevens takes his instructions from someone on the top floor of the complex and heads up there in the special lift to find out who was in charge. He finds that this is the home of Boss, Biomorphic Organizational System Superior, a supercomputer with its own megalomaniac personality. It runs the company, controls Stevens and other key staff members, and is responsible for polluting the chemical process. The polluting chemical process. The Doctor rejects the brainwashing technique that Stevens and the boss subject him to, but Yates is more susceptible and is converted into one of the computer's slaves. After the Doctor escapes, Yates is sent to the nut hutch to kill the Doctor. His conditioning is deep and only broken by the Doctor's use of the blue crystal he brought from Metabolus 3. Jo has alienated Jones, whom she is falling in love, by ruining one of his experimenting slides of green slime. Determined to make amends, she heads to the slide heap in search of a maggot to run some tests on. Meanwhile, Jones finds that the fungus power Jo spilled on the slides is actually a cure for the green death infection. He races to the slide heap to find Jo surrounded by giant maggots, and they are both caught in an RAF bombing raid on the maggots. Jones is affected with the green death and begins to turn green, and not before he was able to share his knowledge of the cure. Jo contacts her unit friends with her radio, and the Doctor and Sergeant Benton rescue two from the maggots in Bessie. Hearing Jones utter the word serendipity, the Doctor realizes that Jones must have stumbled upon something that could combat the maggots and their infection. Benton arrives with the maggot chrysalis, prove that the maggots are beginning to transform into mature giant insects. Then, the maggot that escaped the laboratory is found on the table, dead. Realizing that the creature had died eating from some of the fungus, the Doctor also discovers the cure for Jones. The Doctor and Benton drive around slag heaps, liberally scattering the fungus, which proves deadly to the maggots. They are then attacked by a giant fly creature, the mature adult form of the maggots, which the Doctor kills by throwing his cloak over it when it is in midair, causing it to fall to the ground. The Doctor returns to Global Chemicals to confront the boss. The computer plans to link up with others and effect a corporate takeover of the human race. By now, Stevens is completely under the mad computer's control. The Doctor tells Stevens that the boss's efficiency will result in greater pollution, brainless brainwashed humans, and more death and disease. The Doctor then uses his blue crystal to break Stevens' hypnotic state, and Stevens, infuriated at what the boss has done to him, cross-feeds the generator circuits, causing the whole plant to explode, apparently destroying Stevens and the mad computer. The menace defeated, unit troops and environmentalists gather at the Nut Hutch for a celebration made all the more special when Jo and Jones announces that they are getting married. The Doctor gives his blessing and gives Jo the blue crystal as a wedding present, but since this means the end of Jo's travels with the Doctor, he is evidently upset by the situation and quietly slips away while the party is in full swing. As Jo and Jones dance, the Doctor drives Betsy off into the sunset. Oof, man, gotta tell ya, well, there were some good moments. It was this is very sad with the departure of another companion. But anyway, let's look at some continuity production elements of this story. This story marks the final appearance of Katie Manning as Jo Grant on Doctor Who. She returned to the role in the 2008 audio story The Doll of Death and in the 2010 series of the Sarah Jane Adventuress. She also voices the character Iris Wildthyme in several audio stories. Manning's departure, coupled with the death of Roger Delgado and the announced departure of producer Barry Letts, was a major motivation in John Pertwee's decision to leave the series the following year. The Doctor's journey to Meadowbells 3 was a recurring theme throughout the season. The Prime Minister is addressed as Jeremy, which was a production joke referring to the then Liberal Party leader Jeremy Thorpe. Jo eventually sends the blue crystal back to the Doctor, part of the chain of events which leads to his regeneration and Planet of the Spiders. The Meadowbells 3 crystal appeared in the 11th Doctor story, Hyde. The DVD release of the story features a fictitious documentary, Global Conspiracy, starring Mark Gatiss as an investigative reporter Terry Scanlon, following up the events surrounding the incident at Global Chemicals. Several actors from The Green Death briefly reprised their roles, and it is revealed that Stevens and Boss survived. Dun dun dun! During the recording of the footage of the maggots around the quarry site, several of the maggot props were in fact inflated condoms, some inflated with air, others with water. The colliery used for filming was Ogledd Colliery near Derry, Caerphilly, while Global Chemicals was the RCA International Factory in Bryn Mawr. The script required the Doctor to state that the maggots have thick, chitinous skin. Pertwee asked producer Barry Letts how to pronounce the words, and Letts, unaware of the term, told him to announce the first syllable chit rather than more correct kite. 2 days after episode 4 was broadcast, Letts received a letter consisting simply of the words, "The reason I'm writing is to how to say kitten," or something like that, yeah. This story marks the final appearance of the Howlaround title sequence introduced in 1970. It is also the last appearance of the logo introduced in Spearhead from Space until the 1996 television movie. The 1996 version of this logo has been used for marketing purposes by the BBC since that time, and is still used for the classic series. The closing graphics are run upside down and backwards in episodes 2, 5, and 6. The reasons for this are unclear, and may have been done to save time on rewinding the film or try something new with the titles since they would not be used again. Tony Adams, who played Elgin, was taken ill during the recording of The Green Death, and so Roy Skelton was brought in to play a new character called Mr. James, who was given the lines written for Elgin. In Global Conspiracy, Adams actually uses his real illness as an explanation for his character's sudden absence towards the end of the story. The part of Professor Clifford Jones was played by Sarah Bevan. Bevan was at the time engaged to Katie Manning. The fictional couple become engaged at the end of the story, whereas Bevan and Manning separated a year after the show was recorded. The Doctor temporarily stumps Boss by asking it, "If I were to tell you that the next thing I would say would be true, but the last thing I said was a lie, would you believe me?" This is an example of the liar paradox, which dates back to at least the 4th century BC. Whew. Well, overall, I say this is a pretty interesting story. And as companion departures go, this one is a little bit on the tug at your heartstrings side. So, overall, I give The Green Death 4 sonic screwdrivers out of 5. Well, join me next time as we talk about not only the introduction of the Centaurans, but also the introduction of my all-time favorite companion. That's right, the one, the only, Sarah Jane Smith. And we'll talk about that next week in The Time Warrior. Should be fun. So, until then, this is Hoovie and Queen saying, "Oh my giddy aunt!" And I say, "Run, run! I have a polarity of the neutron flow. Would you like a jelly baby? Fantastic! Allons-y! Geronimo!" Bow ties are cool, fezzes are cool, and Stetsons are cool.